Welcome to this quiet haven carved out from the rushing stream of time, dedicated solely to your rest and renewal. Tonight, we delve into the heart of Zen wisdom, exploring the profound truth of interdependence or dependent origination, the cornerstone of Buddhist philosophy that reveals how nothing exists truly alone, autonomously, or permanently. We will discover that your being, your thoughts, and your deepest sense of self are intrinsically linked to everything else, like threads in an endless, shimmering tapestry. Before we truly settle, if you are finding comfort in this moment, take a brief moment to tap the like button, and if you feel guided, share the country and the hour you are listening in the comments below. This sacred space is sustained by the intention to provide continuous solace and uninterrupted calm, cultivating a harbor where the mind can safely drop anchor. If this mission resonates with the deep need for peace within your spirit, we warmly invite you to subscribe, ensuring you never lose your way back to this quiet harbor and helping us maintain this cultivation of stillness for all who seek refuge. Now, let us begin the gentle process of physical return, guiding your awareness back into the vessel of your body, starting with the breath, noticing its soft rise and fall. Allow your shoulders to melt away from your ears, releasing invisible weights, softening the tension in your jaw and eyes, giving permission to every fiber of your being to completely relax and surrender to the support beneath you, dissolving any need to monitor or worry, simply settling deeper into the delicious, heavy comfort of the earth's embrace, Kenshin and the autumn garden. Let us now walk together softly into the heart of our story, arriving at a secluded, ancient Zen garden, known simply as the Garden of Impermanence. Nestled high upon a misty mountainside where the air is crisp and carries the faint, earthy scent of damp moss and pine needles. This is the dwelling of the monk Kenshin, a man whose life was dedicated to stillness, yet whose mind remained perpetually troubled by the relentless questioning of identity, the eternal puzzle of where the self begins and ends, a question that, like a splinter, prevents true, deep rest. Kenshin spent countless hours tending to this garden, a meticulous work of raking fine sand into patterns of flowing water, observing the meticulous order, all while feeling a deep, nagging disconnect within his own soul, a feeling of being an isolated observer rather than an intrinsic part of the scene. Today, Kenshin stands beside an ancient, sprawling maple tree, its canopy a breathtaking burst of scarlet and gold against the pale autumn sky, perfectly mirroring the restless beauty of his own searching heart. The ground beneath the tree is a thick, yielding carpet of fallen leaves, rustling quietly with every subtle breath of wind, providing a gentle symphony of dissolution and change, a sound that is both comforting and slightly melancholic, reminding him that all things inevitably pass. He watches one specific perfect maple leaf, a vibrant ruby red, clinging tenuously to its branch, poised for its imminent departure from the life source that has nourished it through the long, bright summer months. This single, magnificent leaf becomes the temporary focus of Kenshin's meditation, embodying the very problem he strives to solve, the illusion of the discrete object. He observes the leaf with intense scrutiny, seeing it as an autonomous, beautifully complete entity, convinced that at the moment it drops, it will cease to be the leaf and simply become dead matter, failing to perceive the deeper truth of continuous transformation and exchange. He holds tightly to the conceptual belief that objects possess intrinsic existence, a fixed, unchanging selfhood, a philosophical stance that causes unnecessary suffering. Because if the leaf is a permanent self, its inevitable downfall represents a true, tragic end, rather than merely a change of state. The struggle for Kenshin, and for us tonight, lies in the human mind's innate tendency to draw sharp, rigid boundaries where none exist in reality, to categorize and separate the world into neat, manageable units of me and not me, this and that, creating a psychological tension that obstructs the natural flow of life. He yearns for the stability of a permanent identity, just as he wishes the leaf would remain forever suspended in its moment of autumnal glory, resisting the natural, powerful current of change that defines all reality. This desire for permanence, this failure to see the fluidity of existence, is what the Buddha termed avidya, ignorance, the root cause of all unease and the initial point of the cycle we are about to explore. Kenshin closes his eyes, inhaling the cool, sharp air, attempting to integrate the visual splendor of the leaf with the philosophical understanding of its inevitable disintegration, struggling to align the sensory input with the deeper spiritual wisdom. His body, however, remains taut, his shoulders slightly raised, indicative of the mental effort expended in trying to force understanding, rather than gently allowing realization to arise naturally, like the morning mist over the valley. We too often try too hard to grasp concepts, to control our sleep, or force our relaxation, forgetting that the deepest truths, like the deepest rest, arrive only when we cease our straining. He remembers a fragment of ancient wisdom spoken by his old teacher. A boat cannot float upon itself. It requires water, air, and the skill of the rower. Is the boat then separate from the water? This koan drifts through his mind, an elusive truth that whispers of shared existence and mutual necessity, gently challenging the rigid concept of the leaf's self-contained identity. The teacher's words suggest that identity is not a solitary noun, but a dynamic, relational verb, an ongoing process of interacting and becoming, continually shaped by everything surrounding it, moment by deep, slow moment. As the sun dips lower behind the peak, lengthening the shadows across the carefully raked gravel, Kenshin opens his eyes again and sees the leaf, no longer as a solitary artifact, but as a convergence point, a temporary manifestation of countless preceding causes and conditions working in seamless concert. He begins, almost against his will, to perceive the presence of the forest floor, the roots deep beneath the soil, and the gravitational pull of the earth itself, all participating fully in the leaf's existence and its final descent. This realization is the first subtle crack in the wall of ignorance, hinting at the vast supportive network underlying all apparent individuality. This understanding is the core of Paticca Samuppada, the dependent origination, which states that when this is, that is, when this arises, that arises, when this is not, that is not, when this ceases, that ceases. It is a magnificent, circular dance of cause and effect, where no entity stands alone. The leaf, the wind, the sun, the monk, and the listener are all inextricably woven into this grand, single moment of being, arising and passing away together in a continuous, beautiful stream of change. We invite you now to adopt the posture of Kenshin, a quiet observer, ready to let go of the struggle for definition and separation, allowing the truth of interbeing to gently seep into your consciousness, softening the sharp edges of your day's accumulated worries. Feel the deep relaxation that comes from knowing you do not have to hold the weight of your entire existence on your own shoulders, recognizing that you are fundamentally connected, supported, and sustained by the entire universe. Look deeply at the leaf, whispered the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, and you will see the sun, the cloud, and the whole universe in it. This powerful contemplation is not just poetic, it is physically and spiritually true. Everything that sustains the leaf, the moisture from the clouds, the warmth of the sun, the rich minerals from the soil, is simultaneously sustaining you, the listener, who breathes the oxygen produced by the interconnected botanical world. Now, as the shadows deepen and Kenshin prepares to continue his observation, dissolving the concept of the leaf's singularity, we prepare to deepen our own journey, following the subtle energy that flows from the sun to the soil, and back again, tracing the invisible connections that bind us all together in peaceful existence, leading us inevitably toward the deepest form of rest, the illusion of singularity. Kenshin continued to gaze upon the solitary maple leaf, now viewing it not just as a natural wonder, but as a profound teacher of illusion, noticing how its rich venous structure seemed almost like a miniature network of rivers, carrying life and sustenance throughout its delicate tissues, while its brilliant crimson hue spoke of the summer's intense absorption of sunlight and the autumn's chemical withdrawal. The mind, being a relentless sculptor of concepts, immediately assigns this object the label leaf, granting it a fixed, independent identity, separating it conceptually from the branch it clings to, the tree that bore it, and the air that surrounds it, creating an artificial boundary of selfhood. This mental act of naming and separating, this deep-seated habit of intellectual dissection, is precisely the source of the monks and our own suffering, as we mistakenly believe that this isolated, defined object possesses inherent, standalone existence, overlooking the vast, unseen machinery of interdependence that truly brings it into being, moment by moment. In the still silence of the garden, Kenshin began a meticulous, non-judgmental observation, moving his attention from the physical appearance of the leaf to the intangible forces interacting with it, noticing the infinitesimal movements caused by the faintest whispers of wind that dance through the branches. He observed that the leaf was not perfectly still. It vibrated slightly, a continuous subtle tremor caused by the air currents and the energetic tension between the branch and the approaching gravity, suggesting that its identity was constantly being molded, tugged, and influenced by external non-leaf elements. This sensory immersion forced him to question the rigidity of the object's boundary. If the leaf is perpetually moving due to the invisible pressure of the atmosphere, can we definitively say where the leaf ends and the ambient air begins its effect? The core question that arose from this deep contemplation challenged the very essence of the ego's definition of individuality, transforming the simple act of looking at a leaf into a deep philosophical inquiry. Where, precisely, does the entity, known as the leaf, terminate? And where does the environment, the very air it utilizes for respiration, the moisture it holds, the light it processes, truly begin to assume dominion? If the leaf were instantly removed from the presence of air and light, it would instantaneously cease to function and quickly perish, proving that its existence is not self-contained, but rather an ongoing event of participation with everything surrounding it. This profound, undeniable mutual dependency began to erode Kenshin's deeply ingrained habit of seeing the world in terms of hard, separate boxes, initiating a gentle and necessary cognitive shift toward acceptance of inherent fluidity. This notion of inherent non-existence, often translated as emptiness or shunyata in Buddhist philosophy, does not imply that the leaf is completely non-existent, a void in space, but rather that it is empty of a fixed, permanent, self-sufficient core identity, confirming that it is merely a temporary aggregation of conditional factors that will soon disperse. The leaf is real, vividly red and beautifully formed, but its reality is relational, It exists only in relation to its causes and conditions: the tree, the water, the sunlight, the history of the soil, and crucially, in relation to the mind that perceives it, labeling and defining its form. Understanding this interconnected fragility brings immense mental relief, as it removes the painful need to cling to the illusion of permanent objects or a permanent self. Kenshin then turned his gaze inward, realizing that his own suffering, his restless mind, and his struggle to attain perfect stillness was merely the human equivalent of the leaf clinging to the branch, rooted in the delusion that he, the monk Kenshin, was a fixed, solid, independent entity fighting against an external world. The same ignorance, avidya, that saw the leaf as separate also saw his mind as separate from his body, his history, and the collective consciousness of the monastery. He recognized that his thoughts, his emotions, and his entire physical form were equally dependent upon countless non-self elements: the food he ate, the oxygen he breathed, the teachings he heard, and the gravitational pull that kept him grounded on the mountainside. The Zen adage states, "If you want to understand the whole, look closely at the one." By dedicating himself to the quiet observation of this single, ordinary leaf, Kenshin was inadvertently dismantling the entire edifice of his perceived isolation, piece by careful piece. He observed the slight, almost imperceptible trembling of the leaf, sensing that its vibrant red color was already fading slightly as the cellular processes slowed, recognizing that its very beauty was a product of its ongoing demise, a brilliant flash before its return to the earth. This intimate dance between life and decay is not a tragedy, but the very mechanism of universal renewal, confirming that separation is merely an optical illusion born of momentary perspective. He allowed his eyes to soften, expanding his peripheral vision to include the vast blue sky above, the rugged texture of the mountain stone, and the distant silver ribbon of the river winding through the valley below, realizing that the leaf was perfectly positioned within this immense and complex panorama. The simple act of observation shifted from analytical scrutiny to compassionate inclusion, viewing the leaf not as a specimen under a microscope, but as a vital node in an infinite network of mutual support, a small, perfect manifestation of the universe reflecting upon itself. This profound realization that the self and the external world are fundamentally interwoven is the beginning of wisdom, serving as the antidote to the anxiety born of isolation. When we understand that our well-being is intrinsically linked to the well-being of the whole, the intense, ego-driven pressure to achieve perfection or permanent stability instantly releases its grip. We can relax into the flow of existence, trusting the vast supportive mechanism of interbeing. Kenshin finally let out a long, silent breath, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders as he absorbed the lesson of the leaf's non-self, understanding that its beauty was not a solitary achievement, but a collaborative effort involving immense geological and solar forces. He decided to let the leaf continue its teaching, allowing the image of its redness and its precarious position to anchor his thoughts, knowing that this contemplation of dependent existence was the most direct pathway to the deep, healing peace he so desperately sought. Now, let this gentle realization of non-separateness permeate your own mind, allowing the concept of your own fixed, burdened self to momentarily soften and dissolve into the supportive environment around you, preparing to delve deeper into the specific ways the universe works in concert to manifest all phenomena. The embrace of sun and earth. As the afternoon light began to diffuse through the thinning cloud cover, casting a pale gold hue over the Zen garden, Kenshin deepened his contemplation of the leaf, moving beyond the obvious visual and atmospheric connections to consider the fundamental elemental forces that made the leaf's existence possible, forces that often remain invisible until deliberately searched for. He understood that the brilliant red pigment, the very structure of the cell walls, and the energy required for the leaf to cling to its branch for so many months, required a constant, unrelenting input of solar energy, traveling millions of miles through cold space simply to manifest warmth and color in this single small point of matter. If the sun were to fail, the leaf would not merely lose its color, it would cease to be in its current form within minutes, proving that the sun, a massive entity millions of times larger than the Earth, is an indispensable non-leaf component of the leaf's reality. This realization led Kenshin's focus to the Earth itself, recognizing the subtle, powerful support system that sustained the great tree, and therefore the leaf, through the meticulous and slow process of absorbing essential nutrients and hydration from the deep, rich loam beneath the surface. He visualized the complex subterranean network of roots, fungi, and microbial life working in unseen harmony, transforming decaying matter, broken rock, and ancient silt into the precise mineral compounds, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, that were absolutely necessary to construct the leaf's cellular framework. The leaf is quite literally composed of the remnants of mountains, the dust of stars, and the decomposed bodies of past generations of life, showing that nothing in the present is purely original or independent. He then reflected on the breath of the leaf, the intricate process of photosynthesis, a profound, silent partnership between the botanical world and the atmosphere, a process entirely dependent on the presence of carbon dioxide, which is often dismissed as mere waste or pollution. The leaf exists because it absorbs this gaseous compound, transforming it, through the magical alchemy of chlorophyll and sunlight, into the complex sugars that feed the tree, simultaneously releasing the essential oxygen that Kenshin himself was breathing in that very moment. His inhalation was proof of the leaf's contribution, and the leaf's vitality was proof of the atmosphere's necessary presence, demonstrating a flawless reciprocal exchange that obliterates any notion of separation between the monk and the maple. This interwoven dependency is the philosophical bedrock of Buddhist cosmology, which posits that no entity, from the largest galaxy to the smallest particle, possesses svabhava, or inherent, self-sufficient existence. All things are merely manifestations arising from the coalescence of supportive elements. The leaf is not merely sitting on the earth. The leaf is the earth, transformed by light and water. It is not merely absorbing sunlight. The leaf is condensed sunlight, captured and stabilized for a brief season. This deep, systemic interconnectedness means that to harm the soil is to harm the leaf, and to harm the sun's ability to shine is to destroy the very possibility of the tree. Allowing his vision to blur slightly, Kenshin experienced a gentle merging of boundaries, feeling the weight of the mountain beneath his feet, the warmth of the distant sun upon his skin, and the movement of the wind within his lungs, understanding that his own body was subject to the same relentless, dependent laws as the leaf. He realized that the minerals in his bones came from the ancient earth, the water in his blood was drawn from the clouds, and the energy that animated his thoughts was directly derived from the same sun that nourished the maple. His self was not a separate mind trapped in a body, but a temporary nexus point of cosmic forces, a beautiful and complex whirlpool in the river of universal matter. This realization is profoundly liberating for the subconscious mind, as it allows us to drop the exhausting burden of self-maintenance and control, recognizing that we are held and operated by forces far greater and more intelligent than our individual willpower. We can finally relax into the profound cosmic understanding that everything we need, support, energy, peace, and eventually deep rest, is already provided by the infinite interdependency of the universe, requiring only our quiet, mindful acceptance. Kenshin then recited an ancient verse to himself, moving the philosophical concept into a lived physical reality. Because there is earth, there is the tree. Because there is rain, there is the moisture. Because there is the light, there is the color. Because of the many, there is the one. This reminder is crucial for sleep, as it counters the mind's tendency to obsess over individual isolated problems, reminding us that every challenge is part of a larger, solvable systemic issue, alleviating the feeling of lonely struggle. The monk smiled faintly, a sense of deep, gentle calm finally settling over his face, feeling the warmth of the sun that had fed the leaf now settling upon his own eyelids, guiding him toward a deeper meditative state. He understood that the leaf's eventual falling would not be an end, but a necessary contribution back to the soil, restarting the cycle, proving that its existence was eternal, merely changing form. As we prepare to transition into the next chapter, where we will examine the flow of water and the invisible cloud, allow the profound, foundational support of the sun and the earth to ground your current moment of rest, feeling the solid, nourishing presence beneath you, confirming that you are fully sustained and securely held by the universe, preparing your mind for effortless sleep, the message of water and the cloud. Having absorbed the lesson of the sun and the soil, Kenshin lifted his gaze toward the sky, focusing now on the subtle, silent element of water, recognizing it as the universal carrier and connector that binds all living and non-living things into a seamless, unified flow. Observing the faint, almost translucent wisp of a cloud that drifted lazily over the mountain peak, its form constantly shifting and reforming in the upper atmosphere. He recognized that the vitality and turgor, the essential crispness and life of the red maple leaf, depended entirely upon the constant cycling and availability of water, which itself is never truly stationary, but eternally engaged in a gravitational solar-powered journey from the ocean depths to the high clouds, through the atmosphere as rain, and back up through the roots of the tree. This continuous hydrological cycle beautifully illustrates the principle of interbeing. The leaf is impossible without the ocean, even though they appear geographically separated by hundreds of miles and fundamentally different in form. Kenshin closed his eyes briefly, mentally tracing the journey of a single drop of water contained within the leaf's structure, imagining the intense, solar-driven heat that drew it upwards from the vast, dark expanse of the Pacific Ocean, transforming its salty, liquid mass into an invisible vapor that ascended into the cooler regions of the atmosphere, where it aggregated with billions of other molecules to form the very cloud now floating above. This cloud, which seemed so ethereal and distant, was the temporary floating reservoir that would eventually release its burden as the gentle rain necessary to quench the thirst of the tree, allowing its roots to absorb the life-giving moisture that eventually reached the leaf he was observing, confirming that the cloud, the rain, and the ocean are all integral, necessary parts of the leaf's momentary existence. This recognition of the fluid, ever-changing nature of the water cycle serves as a profound metaphor for the interconnectedness of our own identities and experiences, mirroring how our own thoughts and emotions are never static entities, but fluid states that arise, endure briefly, and then return to the collective source, just like a cloud dissolving back into the sky or rain soaking back into the earth. The energy that fuels our actions is like the heat of the sun, driving the cycle of consciousness and manifestation, proving that the self we try so hard to stabilize and control is merely a momentary condensation of universal processes, always dependent on the flow of sensory input and historical causes, reinforcing the need for gentle acceptance rather than rigid resistance. The monk reflected on the teaching of the great Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, who often used the image of the cloud to teach about non-separation. If you are a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. This profound statement highlights that the paper, like the leaf, is dependent on the wood pulp, the tree, which needs the rain, the cloud, which needs the sun, the heat, dissolving the illusion that the object has independent reality. By extending this simple poetic vision to his own life, Kenshin realized that his suffering was often merely the condensation of historical causes, past actions, inherited tendencies, and social conditioning, which he mistakenly took as his permanent fixed character. He allowed the quiet rustling sound of the nearby bamboo grove, agitated by a sudden faint increase in the wind, to anchor his attention, letting the sound remind him of the continuous subtle movements of all phenomena, demonstrating that even stillness is simply the temporary confluence of opposing energies. Much like the water remaining still in a pond is merely waiting for the next disturbance. The fluidity of water, the transparency of the air, and the patient gravity of the earth all operate in silent partnership, forming a vast cosmic tapestry where no single thread can claim independence, offering immense relief from the burden of individual selfhood. Kenshin felt a deep, compassionate tenderness for the leaf, understanding it not as an inanimate object destined for decay, but as a temporary, perfect manifestation of cosmic collaboration, a fleeting masterpiece created by the sun, the cloud, the ocean, and the earth, proving that its fate was linked to the fate of all things. This understanding brings immense mental relaxation, as it dissolves the fear of loss and change, replacing it with the calm assurance that energy, matter, and consciousness merely recycle, transforming endlessly within the supportive embrace of the universe. We too can feel this sense of being completely held by the vast mechanism of interbeing, allowing the image of the circulating water, the patient, continuous and selfless effort of the ocean and the cloud, to wash away any lingering feelings of isolation or internal struggle. Recognize that the moisture in your own breath connects you immediately to the clouds that drift far above, cementing your place within this eternal cycle of giving and receiving, which is the definition of true, supportive existence. By softening your mental boundaries and accepting this profound fluidity, you are gently preparing your mind to enter the state of deep, restorative sleep, where the rigid constraints of the individual self momentarily dissolve, allowing you to float securely within the universal current. Let the gentle memory of the leaf's reliance on the cloud become a soothing mantra, guiding your thoughts toward effortless rest. Breaking through the shell of ignorance, avijja. Having established the undeniable physical interdependence of the leaf and the external elements, the sun, the earth, and the water, Kenshin now turned his meditative inquiry inward, recognizing that the subtle process of physical manifestation mirrors the deeper psychological chain that creates suffering, leading directly into the profound Buddhist teaching known as Paticcasamuppada, or the 12 links of dependent origination, which begins crucially with the first link, ignorance, avijja. This ignorance is not a lack of factual knowledge or intellectual dullness, but a fundamental, visceral misapprehension of reality, a deep-seated inability to perceive the radical impermanence, anicca, and the inherent non-self, anatta, of all phenomena, whether they are physical objects like the leaf or mental events like a fleeting thought. Kenshin realized that his initial perception of the leaf, seeing it as a solid, self-existing, permanent thing, separate from the rest of the garden, was precisely the manifestation of this primeval ignorance, the conceptual husk that separates the perceiving mind from the true nature of the perceived world. This avijja is the starting point of the entire cycle of suffering, acting as the darkness from which all subsequent missteps in consciousness arise, like a seed buried in the ground that knows nothing of the light, but still possesses the potential for complex manifestation. If we mistakenly believe that we or others possess an unchanging solid self, we are instantly subject to fear, clinging, and the profound disappointment that inevitably follows change. He sat motionless, deliberately relaxing the muscle tension around his eyes and jaw, areas where the effort to fixate and define the world is often physically stored, reflecting on how ignorance leads us to perpetually chase permanence in a world defined by flow, seeking stable ground where there is only shifting sand. We yearn for lasting pleasure, permanent relationships, and an unchanging identity, yet every moment of reality relentlessly teaches us otherwise, creating the painful tension between our flawed perception, ignorance, and the dynamic truth, interdependence. The breaking of this shell of ignorance is therefore the necessary first step toward true liberation, often achieved not through intellectual study, but through the deep, patient, non-reactive observation of our sensory experiences. The monk realized that ignorance often disguises itself as certainty or opinion, clinging aggressively to fixed views about how things should be or who I truly am, refusing to accept the fluid, conditioned nature of existence. He watched his own mind generate opinions about the quality of the light, the chill of the morning air, and the beauty of the leaf, recognizing each of these thoughts as small, temporary products of the larger ignorance, confirming that every time we assign a fixed identity or judgment, we are momentarily perpetuating the cycle of separation and potential suffering. In this deep, quiet moment, Kenshin chose to apply the antidote to avijja, mindful awareness and wisdom, panya, deliberately choosing to see the leaf not as red leaf, but as light, water, earth, and time, thus dissolving its fixed identity and affirming its interbeing. This gentle shift in perspective, moving from separation to unity, is the core practice of Zen, allowing the mind to relax its defining function and simply accept reality as a whole, unbounded event, rather than a collection of separate, manageable parts. This deliberate cultivation of non-ignorant awareness allows us to see the immense kindness of the universe, understanding that the cycle of dependent origination is not a punishment, but a meticulous map describing how suffering is created and how it can be undone, proving that liberation is always available the moment we choose to perceive reality clearly. Ignorance is merely a lack of light, and the simple act of attention is the flicking of the switch, illuminating the path toward profound peace. As you allow the profound concept of ignorance to settle gently in your subconscious mind, recognize that the effort to attain sleep is sometimes hampered by the very belief that you must perform the action of sleeping. Release the need for control, knowing that relaxation and rest are naturally occurring states when the mind ceases its struggle to define and separate. Allow the ancient wisdom of avijja to guide your awareness toward the present moment, dissolving all unnecessary mental resistance as we prepare to move to the next link in the chain. The formations that arise from this initial lack of wisdom. Formations and silent volition. The foundation of ignorance having been laid, the pervasive misunderstanding that things, including ourselves, possess separate, permanent identities, the immediate consequence and the second link in the chain of dependent origination is the arising of volitional formations, or sankhara. These formations are not passive results, but active, constructing forces, comprising all intentional mental, verbal, and physical activities that generate karmic energy, setting the trajectory for future experience and cementing the initial misapprehension into action. Kenshin watched the gentle breeze shift the position of the fallen maple leaf he had been observing, recognizing that just as external forces propelled the leaf, internal volitions silently guide our every breath, every minor adjustment of posture, and every flicker of thought, confirming that even in profound stillness, the engine of intention is constantly at work, weaving the fabric of the life to come. These formations are typically divided into three categories, but their essence is the silent, pervasive impulse to act, driven by the desire either to cling to the pleasant or push away the unpleasant, which is itself a direct outflow of the ignorance that precedes it. Even the simple act of Kenshin sitting still, trying to maintain perfect stillness against the slight, uncomfortable itch on his knee, generates a mental formation, a tiny, powerful volition of resistance or desire for cessation, illustrating the relentless, micro-level generation of sankhara. He understood that the collective mass of these micro-volitions, accumulated over a lifetime, is what shapes the character and conditioning of the individual, proving that we are continuously building the framework of our own future experiences, often completely unaware of the immense power held within a single subtle intention. The monk focused specifically on kaya sankhara, or bodily formations, which include the rhythmic autonomic functions of the body, such as the quiet, steady in and out flow of the breath and the barely perceptible beating of the heart, recognizing that even these essential biological processes, while mostly involuntary, are conditioned by past actions and carry karmic residue that influences our future physical state. He felt the weight of his own body sinking gently into the mat, aware of the subtle shifts in muscle tension and relaxation, acknowledging the silent volition that keeps his spine upright against the pull of gravity, illustrating the constant, unceasing effort required just to maintain a temporary physical form that is perpetually battling entropy and disintegration, adding a layer of deep, compassionate understanding for the body's unwavering service. Next, Kenshin turned his attention to vachi sankhara, or verbal formations, which encompass the intentional process of thought formulation immediately preceding speech, or, in his current silent state, the deliberate choice not to speak, recognizing the powerful, shaping energy contained within that conscious restraint. He recalled a conversation from the previous day, analyzing the motive behind his spoken words, realizing that often speech arose not from pure necessity, but from a subtle, ingrained desire for validation or intellectual superiority, confirming that even the most carefully constructed sentence is laden with volitional energy, adding another thread to the expansive net of future consequences that will inevitably follow. The deepest and most pervasive formations are the mano sankhara, or mental formations, which are the impulses, emotions, and intellectual processes that arise and shape our inner landscape, driving our interpretation of reality and dictating our emotional responses to the world around us. Kenshin watched as a thought of worry about an upcoming task briefly crossed his mind, identifying that brief spark of anxiety not as an event external to him, but as a mental formation, a momentary volition that, if clung to, would create future states of suffering, illustrating the subtle mechanism through which past ignorance perpetually feeds the formation of new, reactive thought patterns. He recognized the profound and sobering realization that the entire physical world he perceives, the ancient, weathered stones of the path, the precise arrangement of the pine branches, the vibrant red of the maple leaf, is simply the aggregate, manifested result of formations from previous lives and previous moments, demonstrating that what appears to be static reality is, in fact, a temporary crystallization of collective volitional energy. The weight of this realization brings a powerful sense of ethical responsibility, demanding meticulous attention to the subtle motivations underlying every action, recognizing the long shadow cast by even the smallest intention. Allowing his body to settle further into the earth, Kenshin felt the cool, damp scent of moss rising gently from the ground, the fragrance serving as a reminder that all sensory input is interwoven with the formations, the intentions and habits that process them, confirming that even our perception of a simple smell is conditioned by previous associations and subtle volitional judgments. He gently released the small, continuous struggle to perfectly control his breath, letting it find its own natural rhythm, understanding that even the effort to relax is, paradoxically, a subtle formation that must ultimately be relinquished for true rest to occur, allowing the body's wisdom to take precedence over the mind's controlling effort. This continuous stream of formations emphasizes the Buddhist truth that nothing in existence is uncaused or unconditioned. Everything is a product of preceding forces and intentions, highlighting that even our present state of rest is conditioned by the volitions that brought us to this quiet place, seeking solace and understanding. This contemplation of sankhara dissolves the illusion of a sudden, uncaused moment, replacing it with the comforting vision of continuity and the gentle assurance that the universe operates according to meticulous laws of cause and effect, offering a stable framework for dissolving anxiety. The stillness of the garden now seemed to radiate with latent energy, the quiet tension of countless formations held in check, and Kenshin understood that the practice of meditation is fundamentally the practice of observing the arising of these formations without attaching to them, allowing their energy to dissipate naturally without generating new karma. As we prepare the mind for deeper rest, we gently cease the volitional activity of planning, judging, and resisting, allowing the silent, powerful engine of sankhara to gradually slow its output, leading us naturally toward the next link in the chain, which is the sheer arising of consciousness itself, consciousness as a floating current. Directly conditioned by the formations, sankhara, generated by our deep-seated ignorance, the third link in the chain of dependent origination is the arising of consciousness, or vijnana, which the Buddha meticulously defined not as a permanent, observing soul or ego, but as the momentary dependent function of mere recognition. This consciousness is the simple awareness that something is occurring, the seeing of a color, the hearing of a sound, the knowing of a thought, arising always in dependence on a specific sense organ and a corresponding object, thus proving its conditional and impermanent nature. Kenshin opened his eyes slightly, noticing the faint silver sheen of dew clinging to a spider's web stretched between two nearby shrubs, recognizing the instantaneous flicker of seeing consciousness that arose the moment light reflected off the web and impacted his retina, confirming that consciousness is never a solid vessel, but rather a fleeting event. This consciousness, therefore, cannot exist independently, but is always tied to its object and its preceding volitional formation. It is precisely because of the karmic energy, sankhara, invested in our perception and attention that consciousness manifests in specific ways, drawing our awareness towards certain stimuli and away from others, reflecting the bias imparted by past intentions. If a person has a strong habit of focusing on criticism, their consciousness will naturally gravitate toward negative verbal stimuli, demonstrating that the place where consciousness arises is determined by the momentum of previous actions, highlighting the inescapable interdependence between the second and third links. To better understand its fluid nature, Kenshin imagined consciousness as a constantly flowing, subterranean river, moving entirely through the tunnels of the six senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind, but never pausing or collecting itself in one fixed reservoir. Every moment brings a new flash, visual consciousness arises and ceases, immediately giving way to auditory consciousness when the distant call of a bird pierces the stillness, followed quickly by mental consciousness when a judgment about the bird's song appears, proving that vijnana is a relentless succession of dependent moments, each dependent on the last, emphasizing the futility of trying to grasp or stabilize the self that appears to be watching. He allowed the gentle, cooling air of the autumn morning to brush against his exposed skin, focusing intently on the immediate, raw sensory experience of touching consciousness, before the mind had time to label it as cold or pleasant. This bare attention revealed that the consciousness of touch is merely an alert, a sensory vibration, not a self-generating entity, confirming that vijnana serves simply as the silent recorder and illuminator of experience, which is why the Buddhist tradition teaches that consciousness is always empty of self-nature. It is merely a function, like a mirror reflecting whatever stands before it without inherent identity. Kenshin reflected that much of our suffering stems from mistaking this fleeting, dependent stream of consciousness for a permanent I or self that is observing the world, leading us to desperately defend this illusory identity against perceived threats or change. When we truly see consciousness as a conditioned flow, like the rapidly passing clouds he observed earlier, we relax the tension of self-preservation, realizing that the I that worries, judges, or feels lonely is merely a temporary aggregation of sensory and mental events, allowing the mind to naturally dissolve into the supportive background of the present moment. The environment of the garden provided continuous, gentle proof of the conditional nature of vijnana. The consciousness of scent would briefly arise when a subtle waft of pine resin reached him, but then quickly subside as the mind shifted its focus to the silent, steady vibration of the air itself, demonstrating that the mind is not one unified observer, but a series of distinct conditional awarenesses rapidly succeeding one another. This observation allows the striving for a fixed state of peace to diminish, replaced by the deep, tranquil acceptance of relentless flow, which is the true definition of calm. We can utilize this understanding of vijnana to deepen our own relaxation, recognizing that thoughts and noises, which sometimes interrupt our descent into sleep, are merely momentary flashes of consciousness arising due to external or internal causes, requiring no active engagement or resistance from us. If a disruptive thought arises, treat it simply as mental consciousness arising, observing its shape and form without investing in its content or narrative, allowing it to dissolve naturally back into the quiet space from which it emerged, removing the volitional energy that sustains it. Let the knowledge that consciousness is merely a dependent function, not a fixed entity, provide immense release from the burden of self, freeing the mind from the exhausting work of maintaining a solidified identity throughout the night. Sink deeply into the awareness that the observing awareness itself is constantly dissolving and reforming, which is the perfect, effortless state for true rest. This flow of recognition, conditioned by past volitions, leads us directly and inevitably to the next crucial link, the manifestation of name and form, where the subjective and objective worlds begin to take coherent shape. Name and form, the emergence of the I. Conditioned by the preceding flow of momentary consciousness, vijnana, the fourth link in the profound chain of dependent origination is the establishment of name and form, or namarupa, which marks the moment when the stream of awareness gathers sufficient coherence to manifest the structure of what we perceive as a person or an entity. A form, rupa, refers to the physical elements, the body, the material composition of Kenshin sitting on the mat, the breath flowing in and out, and the chemical processes that maintain life, while name Nama refers to the four mental aggregates: feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness itself, providing the framework for subjective experience. We begin to see how this temporary aggregation of physical matter and psychological functions gives rise to the convincing, yet ultimately illusory, impression of a fixed self, something solid and distinct from the surrounding world, anchoring the entire cycle of suffering in personal identity. Form, rupa, is fundamentally composed of the four great elements: the solidity of earth, which is present in our bones and muscles, the cohesion of water, found in the blood and fluids circulating gently through our veins, the temperature of fire, evident in our bodily warmth and metabolic processes, and the mobility of air, manifest in the effortless movement of the breath that softly rises and falls in our chest as we rest. Kenshin felt the weight of his own physical form settling against the meditation mat, a feeling of density and grounding. Yet he simultaneously understood that this form was merely a temporary configuration of these four elements, constantly exchanging matter and energy with the environment, proving that the boundary between his body and the air he breathed was merely conceptual, not absolute. Name, nama, the psychological counterpart, encompasses the entire inner landscape of the mind, defining how we process and interact with the physical form. It is the mental machinery that interprets sensory input, assigns emotional value to experiences, and generates the intentions that drive future actions. Without the physical base of the brain, form, there can be no thoughts or memories, name, and conversely, without the organizing principle of the mind, name, the physical matter, form, would be nothing more than inert dust and fluid. The two are inextricably linked, like two bundles of reeds leaning against each other, where if one is removed, the other immediately falls, emphasizing their utter dependence upon each other for existence. The core teaching here is that this name and form arise together, not separately, demonstrating that our experience of reality is always dualistic. A physical object is always immediately interpreted by a mental label, and a mental state always has a physiological manifestation in the body, such as the tightening of muscles when stress arises. This instantaneous co-arising is what traps us in the illusion of individuality, leading us to say, "This is my body," or "This is my thought," effectively solidifying the fluid process into a personal possession. Kenshin listened to the faint rhythmic sound of water dripping from the eaves of the temple roof, recognizing that the sound wave, form, was immediately processed and labeled as drip, name, the simple act demonstrating the constant necessary collaboration between the two aggregates. As we lie here in perfect repose, we can gently observe how name and form are functioning in this very moment, noticing the name, perhaps a slight restlessness or a memory attempting to surface, and the corresponding form, the minuscule tension in the jaw or a slight shift in the breathing pattern, and realize that both are entirely temporary and dependent upon conditions far beyond our individual control. This realization brings an immense sense of spaciousness, allowing the clinging identification to soften its grip, understanding that the self is more like a continuous, swirling vortex of temporary mental and physical events, rather than a solid, unchanging presence, which is the perfect antidote to anxiety. The ancient texts often describe this aggregation of name and form, the 5 skandhas, as being insubstantial, like foam on water, a mirage shimmering in the desert heat, or the trunk of a banana tree, which when stripped layer by layer reveals no solid core whatsoever. We dedicate so much of our waking energy to maintaining and defending this foam, this mirage, forgetting its fleeting nature. Tonight, let us consciously surrender the effort to hold on to the physical form and the mental name, letting the body be heavy and still and allowing the mind to be spacious and unfocused, easing the transition into the deep, restorative currents of sleep. Focusing on the physical form, feel the gentle pressure where your body meets the surface beneath you, confirming the presence of earth and water elements, but without attaching the label "me" to that sensation of pressure. Recognize that this body, this form, is merely a magnificent, temporary shelter for the stream of name, the consciousness, the feelings and the perceptions, and that its impermanence is its deepest source of tranquility. The body is performing its vital functions effortlessly, sustaining the quietude required for the name to soften and dissolve its volitional grip. Kenshin watched the faint, shifting shadows cast by the moonlight on the paper screen of his room, understanding that these shadows too were conditioned phenomena, dependent entirely on the light, the screen, and the obstruction of the eaves, serving as a visual metaphor for his own conditional existence. His own name and form were nothing more substantial than these fleeting shadows, yet they provided the necessary temporary structure through which experience and awareness could manifest, offering a quiet acceptance of the inherent fragility of all things. This dual structure of name and form, however temporary, now provides the very basis through which external reality can be apprehended, acting as the receiving apparatus for the world's input. The established physical and mental framework now moves into the next stage, which requires the operational use of the sensory apertures. The manifestation of the name and form demands the engagement of the 6 sensory bases, leading us inevitably to the 5th critical link in the path of conditioning, the windows through which the light of the world streams in. The 6 sensory bases, salayatana. The establishment of name and form immediately conditions the arising of the 6 sensory bases, or salayatana, which are the 5 physical organs: the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the body, touch, plus the crucial 6th base, the mind itself. These bases are not passive receivers, but active, dependent doorways through which the external world gains entry to the internal stream of consciousness, serving as the essential link between the manifested self and the phenomena surrounding it. Kenshin slowly rotated his attention through these 6 bases, recognizing that they are merely instruments, empty of any self-nature, whose function is entirely dependent upon the objects that impinge upon them, confirming that these doorways only exist when there is something to open them, making them purely conditional apertures for sensory experience. The eye base, the window of sight, is meticulously structured to receive light and form, yet without light, or without the preceding conditions of name and form that establish the organ itself. The eye remains inert and sightless. As we close our eyes, the visual consciousness subsides, yet the capacity remains, ready to spring forth the moment light and the organ meet again, illustrating that the base is only a potential, waiting for its corresponding external condition. Tonight, let us appreciate the immense effort of the eye base, which requires constant maintenance and energy, and allow it to rest fully, sinking into the deep, nourishing darkness behind the lids, relinquishing the effort of looking. The ear base, that remarkable organ of hearing, remains constantly open, receiving the subtle sounds of the night, even in the deepest silence of the temple garden. We can gently observe the way the ear base registers the faint, distant cry of an owl, or the almost imperceptible rustle of leaves stirred by the lightest breeze, recognizing these sounds simply as vibrations in the air, without attaching narrative or judgment to them. The ear does not choose what it hears, it merely registers the pressure waves, providing a perfect example of passive, dependent functioning, encouraging us to allow the sounds to simply pass through us without holding on. The body base, which encompasses the skin and internal sensations, is the aperture for touch and deep physical feeling, constantly registering the temperature of the air, the gentle sensation of clothing against the skin, and the internal pulsing of blood and breath. Kenshin focused on the pervasive, yet gentle sensation of the cool autumn air, lightly wrapping around his hands, realizing that this sensation is the meeting of the external element, air, and the internal base, skin, marking the boundary where external reality seems to become internal experience. Yet even this feeling of boundary is fleeting and conditional. The mind base is the unique sixth sense, the internal doorway that operates just like the other five, but takes mental objects, thoughts, memories, images, feelings, and abstract concepts as its input, rather than physical light or sound waves. When we attempt to quiet the mind before sleep, we are effectively attempting to reduce the flow of objects entering this mind base, allowing the internal chatter to subside. And Kenshin understood that just as the eye cannot refuse light, the mind cannot refuse the arising of conditioned thoughts, but we can refuse to engage with them. It is important to recognize that the bases themselves are empty. The ear is not the one who hears, and the eye is not the one who sees. Maid, they are merely windows, tools provided by the condition of name and form, serving as the necessary bridge for the next step in the causal chain. If the eye did not exist, visual consciousness could never arise. If the mind base was inactive, abstract thoughts could not be processed. They stand ready, primed for interaction, waiting for the external stimulus that will inevitably lead to contact. Allowing the attention to rest gently on the entire sensory apparatus, we feel the body settling into a state of deeply guarded peace, understanding that we are temporarily withdrawing the active function from these bases to allow for rejuvenation. Feel the gentle warmth radiating from your core, a soft, comforting sensation registered by the body base, a final calming reminder of your temporary physical presence, perfectly prepared to surrender its vigilant watch for the night. The careful examination of the sensory bases reveals them not as personal possessions, but as part of the universal machinery of conditioned existence, easing the attachment to our perceptions. As the bases remain ready, their simple presence guarantees the next stage, the immediate meeting between the organ, the object, and consciousness. This unavoidable convergence is the moment of contact, the pivotal sixth link that transforms potential into kinetic experience. The encounter in the Zen garden. Conditioned by the preceding operation of the six sensory bases, salayatana, the sixth link in the ancient chain of dependent origination is contact, or phassa, which signifies the precise momentary coming together of the sense organ, the object of perception, and the corresponding consciousness, marking the beginning of experiential awareness. This is the fleeting, instantaneous point where the external world, now filtered through the name and form of Kenshin's being, is first apprehended by the mind, creating a pulse of immediate reality. Contact is not an enduring state, but a swift, non-volitional event, like a spark igniting the fuel, initiating the entire process of recognizing and interpreting the environment. And it is crucial to observe this moment with deep mindfulness, understanding its profound role as the threshold between the impersonal world of phenomena and the emergence of subjective experience. We can illustrate this contact by focusing gently on the auditory input around us, perhaps the faintest vibration of air currents or the distant sound of night traffic that might reach the ear base. The sound object, vibration, meets the ear base, organ, and immediately, simultaneously, auditory consciousness arises. This confluence of three elements is the single, integrated moment of contact, phassa. It happens without command, instantly and completely, demanding no effort from the listener other than the passive reception provided by the already established sensory base. Kenshin sat in the deepening twilight, and when a soft branch snapped under the weight of an unseen bird nearby, the contact occurred, creating a perfect, undeniable demonstration of interdependence. No bird snap, no auditory contact, no ear base, no consciousness of the snap. Now, let us bring this quiet awareness to the body base, the organ of touch, observing the pervasive contact that is happening between the skin and the surface beneath us, or the simple, continuous contact between our breath and the interior walls of our nasal passages. The air, an external object, gently presses against the internal body base, and tactile consciousness arises, informing us of coolness or warmth, softness or firmness. This is not yet a feeling in the emotional sense, but a raw, impersonal input, a registration of physical presence that immediately establishes the boundary of the body in space. Yet even this firm sensation of boundary is subject to instantaneous dissolution when the posture shifts or the air temperature subtly changes. Even with our eyes softly closed, visual consciousness continues to flicker through the mind base, taking mental objects as its input, and here too, contact occurs. The memory of the day, a sudden abstract thought about tomorrow, or the subtle internal play of color and shape behind the eyelids, these are all mental objects that contact the mind base, instantaneously giving rise to the mental consciousness that recognizes the object. It is a profound realization that the mind itself is constantly seeking contact, even when the 5 physical senses are resting, emphasizing the persistent, conditioned nature of awareness, which is always dependent on the presence of an object to engage with. The deep Zen insight embedded within the understanding of phassa is that contact is entirely impersonal, void of any ownership or self-nature. It is merely a function of the universe flowing through the temporary vessel of name and form. The world is rushing in, pouring through the sensory windows, and the moment of contact is just the necessary mechanism that permits this inflow of information. To truly relax, Kenshin realized he had to treat contact as a natural physical law, like gravity, rather than a choice. Allowing the sounds, the pressures, and the thoughts to simply brush past without grabbing hold of them is the beginning of liberation from the cycle of attachment. Let us bring that quiet, non-clinging observation to the sense of smell, noticing if the nose base is contacting any residual aromatic molecules in the air, perhaps the fresh, earthy scent of damp soil carried on a faint breeze, or the clean, neutral scent of the room where you rest. This contact is so subtle, so easily overlooked, yet it requires the perfect alignment of the nose's intricate structure and the presence of the airborne particles to manifest, demonstrating how every single experience, even the most fleeting, depends on a delicate web of preceding conditions. The moment the particles are exhaled or the breeze ceases, the contact is gone, emphasizing the transient beauty of every sensory event. Contact, by its very definition, is marked by extreme impermanence. It is born, exists for a fraction of a moment, and is instantly extinguished, only to be replaced by the next pulse of sensory input. If contact were permanent, experience would stagnate, locked into a single frame. It is the ceaseless succession of contacts that creates the continuous flowing stream of reality we perceive. By cultivating awareness of the brevity of each phassa, we inherently weaken the tendency to cling, recognizing that any attempt to hold on to a sensory moment, a pleasant warmth, a lovely sound, is fundamentally impossible, as the contact has already ceased before the effort is even registered. Philosophically, contact is the central hinge upon which the wheel of conditioned existence rotates, as it determines whether the subsequent experience will lead toward deeper entanglement or toward liberation. If contact arises from the preceding ignorance, the subsequent reaction will be tainted by the illusion of self, leading towards suffering. If, however, contact is met with clear, non-reactive awareness, recognizing its dependent and impersonal nature, the chain can be broken, transforming the fleeting event into a moment of pure, unconditioned wisdom, dissolving the necessity for attachment and aversion to follow. Tonight, as we prepare for deeper rest, we practice letting go of the object contacted. Whether it is a soft sound or a lingering thought, allow the contact to be a brief, gentle pulse that washes over your awareness and immediately fades, like ripples spreading across a pond until the surface is once again still. This act of non-clinging softens the boundary between self and other, encouraging the mind to cease its active engagement and prepare for the expansive dissolution of identity that comes with restorative sleep. However, contact never occurs in isolation. It has an immediate, necessary consequence. The moment the three elements meet, the base, the object, and consciousness, there is instantly and unavoidably generated an affective or hedonic tone, which is the quality we perceive. This necessary offspring of contact is the seventh link in the chain, feeling, the unavoidable taste of the experience that sets the stage for whether we will react with craving or aversion. Feeling, Vedana, the taste of experience. The moment contact, phassa, is established, it immediately conditions the arising of the seventh link. Feeling, Vedana, which is the affective tone or hedonic quality generated by the sensory meeting. It is the raw, immediate taste of the experience, which is categorized simply as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Feeling is not a complex emotion like jealousy or joy, but a primal, automatic signaling system that informs the organism about the desirability or undesirability of the contact. If the sound of the evening air is soft and harmonious, the feeling is pleasant. If the subtle pressure of a pinched nerve arises, the feeling is unpleasant. And if the rhythmic pulsing of the breath is merely noted without preference, the feeling is neutral. When a pleasant feeling arises, such as the profound, settling warmth radiating through the body as you relax deeply into the mattress, there is an immediate, automatic inclination for the mind to desire its continuation, a subtle clinging that seeks to solidify the pleasure into a permanent state of being. This pleasant feeling, arising entirely dependently on the temporary conditions of quietude and rest, is beautiful and conducive to sleep. Yet Kenshin knew that even this positive state must be observed without grasping, recognizing its fundamental fragility, lest the desire for permanence disrupt the very peace it offers. Conversely, if an unpleasant feeling arises, perhaps a subtle tension lingering in the back of the neck, or the minor discomfort of a sudden outside noise, there is an equally automatic and immediate impulse of aversion, a subconscious urge to push the feeling away, to make it cease. This unpleasant feeling, like its pleasant counterpart, is entirely dependent on temporary conditions, the position of the body, the external disturbance, and is inherently impermanent. Kenshin learned to meet these small pockets of unpleasantness with vast patience, recognizing that the feeling itself is merely a transient signal, and that the true suffering lies in the energy expended in fighting against its momentary presence. The vast majority of our sensory input generates neutral feeling, a quiet state of indifference that neither attracts nor repels the mind, the feeling of the air on a spot of skin, the quiet, steady hum of the body's internal processes, or the ambient silence of the night. This neutral feeling often goes unnoticed, making it paradoxically dangerous, as the absence of immediate sensory drama can lead to inattention, causing the mind to seek stimulation elsewhere or to drift into the powerful realm of distraction and conceptual proliferation, thereby feeding the underlying ignorance that maintains the cycle. Kenshin observed that the quality of the feeling, vedana, is utterly dependent on the preceding contact, phassa, a soft breeze that contacts the skin base pleasantly, or the sharp scent of smoke that contacts the nose base unpleasantly. The feeling is never self-generating. It is always the obedient offspring of the sensory meeting, confirming the absolute, moment-to-moment interdependence of all subjective experience. This insight allows us to depersonalize our feelings, seeing them not as indicators of our fixed identity, but merely as temporary results in a grand chain of dependent causality, reducing the power they hold over our emotional stability. Feelings are fundamentally transient, akin to the fleeting waves of light and shadow dancing across the temple walls. They swell, peak, and inevitably subside, regardless of whether they are pleasant or painful. They are never fixed entities, despite our deeply ingrained habit of attempting to crystallize the pleasant ones into solid joy or to fear the unpleasant ones as if they were permanent misfortunes. This recognition of fluidity allows us to hold all feelings lightly, knowing that if we simply allow the feeling to run its course without reaction, its inherent nature of impermanence will dissolve its grip, leading us back to the calm neutrality of the present moment. The core philosophical insight is that the feeling itself is an innocent, conditioned event, a necessary consequence of contact, and does not inherently contain suffering. Suffering only begins in the immediate reaction to the feeling, when we allow the pleasant tone to ignite the fire of craving, tanha, or the unpleasant tone to solidify into aversion. Kenshin realized that the path to peace lies not in eliminating feelings, which is impossible, but in meeting them with non-judgmental equanimity, allowing them to rise and pass through the vast open space of awareness without engaging the engine of attachment. In this deep practice of repose, aiming for the quiet stability of sleep, we are attempting to maintain a pervasive state of neutral or gently pleasant feeling, allowing the body to feel heavy, warm, and secure. However, the moment a disruptive feeling arises, a sudden physical tension, or a surge of anxiety about the tasks of the next day, the stability is challenged, and that is the exact point where we must exercise mindfulness, observing the feeling without identifying with it, refusing to let the momentary disruption escalate into the deep-seated pattern of reaction. We practice cultivating equanimity, treating the pleasant feelings with gratitude but non-clinging, appreciating their transient beauty, and treating the unpleasant feelings with vast spaciousness and patience, acknowledging their necessary dependency on temporary conditions. By holding both with equal, gentle attention, we learn to rest in the wisdom that our ultimate freedom is not contingent upon the perfect quality of our current feeling, but upon our non-reactive relationship to it, allowing the effective tones to settle and subside naturally. Feeling, vedana, stands as the crucial threshold, the penultimate step before the cycle of suffering is potentially perpetuated. If this feeling is observed impersonally and with wisdom, the cycle can break. If, however, the pleasantness is seized upon, or the unpleasantness is fiercely resisted, the chain moves inevitably to the next, most potent link, the arising of craving and thirst, which is the immediate reactive hunger to maintain pleasure and escape pain. Thirst and craving, tanha, the engine of attachment. If the preceding link, feeling, vedana, is met without the wisdom of non-clinging, the wheel of suffering immediately advances to the eighth and perhaps most perilous link, thirst or craving, tanha. This is the powerful, instinctive reaction to feeling, manifesting as an insatiable yearning for the pleasant sensation to remain. a fierce aversion for the unpleasant one to vanish, and a deep-seated craving for stimulation when the feeling is neutral. Craving is often symbolized in Buddhist texts as a thirsty man wandering in a scorching desert, desperate for water that continually recedes from his grasp, reflecting the eternal dissatisfaction inherent in seeking permanence in impermanent phenomena. Let us observe how this craving manifests in the subtle environment of rest. Perhaps as the profound relaxation begins to spread through the muscles of your back and legs, there arises a gentle, pleasant sensation of relief, a beautiful tranquility. Immediately, tanha whispers its demand: keep this, or let this moment last forever. The mind attempts to solidify the fluid feeling, grasping at the very essence of the present ease, yet this very grasping injects a sharp tension into the serenity, creating the fear of its inevitable loss, thereby polluting the pure pleasure with the seeds of future disappointment, demonstrating the immediate self-sabotage inherent in attachment. When the feeling is unpleasant, such as the fleeting echo of a stressful thought from the past day, or a mild physical ache, craving shifts its strategy into active aversion, becoming the desire for non-existence, the fierce, energetic wish for the sensation to be instantly annihilated or pushed far away. This aversion requires significant mental effort, a tensing of the cognitive muscles that resists the simple fact of the present moment, creating unnecessary friction and preventing the acceptance that is essential for deep relaxation. We see how the struggle against the existing reality consumes vast reserves of energy that could otherwise be dedicated to restorative rest and peaceful awareness. The subtle form of craving, perhaps the most pervasive in the meditative state, is the thirst for stimulation or the desire for becoming, bhava, often triggered by neutral feeling. When the environment is quiet, the body is still, and the sensory input is minimal, the mind, conditioned by centuries of seeking and doing, often rebels, craving engagement, excitement, or merely a defined object to latch onto, leading to the internal proliferation of mental narratives, judgments, or elaborate plans for the future. This restless seeking pulls awareness away from the supportive stillness of the present, preventing the deeper settling required for true contemplative rest, revealing the inherent dissatisfaction of the unawakened mind. Kenshin recognized craving as a deep biological reflex, an automatic engine designed to sustain the illusion of separate self. Yet he realized it was not the feeling itself, but the reaction to the feeling that binds us. He sat watching the faint smoke rising from the temple incense, noting the pleasant, calming aroma, and noticed the moment the mind wished the scent would intensify or last longer. And in that precise observation, he found the space to halt the reflexive grasping. The insight derived from this deep attention is that craving is always inherently stressful because its fulfillment is eternally conditional and fleeting, leaving behind only the residue of hunger for the next cycle. The profound teaching here is that craving is not who we are, but something we do. It is a momentary, conditioned response that can be observed and released, rather than a fixed aspect of identity to which we must yield. By treating tanha as a transient mental event, like a shadow briefly cast across the sunlit path, we begin to lessen its tyrannical power. We acknowledge the appearance of the desire for pleasure or the impulse for avoidance, but we refrain from fueling it with active participation, allowing it instead to gently dissipate like mist rising over the ancient stone walls of the garden. Tonight, we practice releasing the hunger of tanha, deliberately loosening the mind's grip on any pleasant or neutral feeling, allowing the body to simply be in its present state, without demanding improvement or permanence. Let the feeling of your blanket be soft, but do not crave the softness to continue indefinitely. Let the silence be deep, but do not fear the intrusion of sound. This subtle withdrawal of intention, this refusal to drink from the salty water of desire, is the essence of the peaceful path, cultivating the profound inner freedom that is independent of external circumstances. The philosophical implication of craving as the essential link is clear, because craving arises entirely dependent on feeling, and feeling arises dependent on contact, and so forth. Its cessation is possible only by interrupting the chain at an earlier point, primarily by meeting the preceding links, ignorance and feeling, with radical awareness. If there is no grasping at the feeling, the thirst cannot take root, and the powerful engine that drives continued existence and rebirth in all its subtle, moment-to-moment forms immediately begins to slow down, yielding to tranquility. The three primary expressions of tanha, craving for sensual pleasures, kama tanha, craving for becoming and existence, bhava tanha, and craving for non-existence or annihilation, vibhava tanha, are all unified by the same root of perpetual dissatisfaction. Whether the mind seeks the pleasure of a cool pillow, the continuation of the self that will wake up tomorrow, or the temporary cessation of present stress, all forms of thirst are ultimately attempts to control the flow of impermanence, which is fundamentally impossible, thus guaranteeing a continuation of striving and restlessness. When the mental landscape is dominated by the quiet observation of the breath and the sounds of the night are simply received without preference, we rest in the profound knowledge that we require nothing more than the present moment as it unfolds. However, if this insidious thirst is allowed to grow, it quickly solidifies and intensifies, transforming from a mere impulse into a firm, active resolve to hold, possess, and control, leading us inexorably to the next stage in the cycle: active clinging and attachment. Clinging and attachment, upadana, to the mountain. The moment craving, tanha, moves beyond a fleeting impulse and settles into a firm, active, and persistent engagement, it transforms into the ninth link, clinging or attachment, upadana. If craving is the hunger, clinging is the actual act of seizing the object, wrapping the hands around the desired or despised phenomenon, and fiercely attempting to hold it fixed against the natural flow of impermanence. This is the stage where the abstract desire for pleasantness solidifies into the concrete adherence to views, rituals, or, most profoundly, the concept of a permanent, possessive self. This clinging is often subtle in the context of rest, perhaps manifesting as the rigid adherence to the notion of a perfect sleeping posture, or the fixed belief that only complete, absolute silence will permit rest. Kenshin used the metaphor of grasping a large, immovable stone. The clinging mind exerts tremendous effort trying to possess or control something that is inherently outside its jurisdiction. This effort generates profound internal pressure and mental rigidity, which are the very antithesis of the fluidity and surrender necessary for restorative sleep and deep meditative insight. Attachment, or upadana, is categorized into four primary forms: clinging to sensual pleasures, the firm insistence on comfort and gratification; clinging to views, the rigid adherence to one's opinions and political beliefs; clinging to rites and rituals, the belief that mere external practices grant enlightenment; and most centrally, clinging to the doctrine of a self, attavada. It is this final, deepest clinging, the adherence to the persistent illusion of a separate, owner-like I who experiences, judges, and possesses, that fuels the entire cycle with the greatest force. The metaphor of the mountain beautifully illustrates the clinging to self. A mountain appears utterly solid, permanent, and separate from the surrounding sky and valleys, yet in reality, It is composed of countless interdependent elements: water, compressed stone, tectonic shifts, atmospheric pressure, and the erosion of time. Similarly, the self we cling to seems solid, but is merely a temporary congregation of the five aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, all dependent, impermanent, and dissolving, moment by moment. The act of clinging to this solid identity is the source of endless fear and defensiveness. When the mind clings to an unpleasant view, such as the persistent judgment that "I am not good enough" or "this pain is permanent," this upadana locks the entire system into a state of frozen suffering. The view is treated not as a temporary mental formation dependent on previous conditions, like avidya, but as an absolute, unchangeable truth. This rigidity prevents the fluid movement of awareness, inhibiting the possibility of insight and ensuring that the painful pattern will be compulsively repeated, generating the energy for future cycles of dissatisfaction. We observe this clinging in the simplest act of trying to stop thought. The initial feeling is one of restlessness, followed by the craving for silence, which solidifies into the active clinging to the idea of a thought-free state. The mind, by actively fighting itself, is merely reinforcing the sense of dualism and separation. True peace only emerges when we release the active adherence to the desired outcome, allowing the thoughts to flow through, unjudged and unpossessed, recognizing them as impersonal mental events rather than indicators of a faulty self. In this deep hour of rest, allow the body to release any active adherence to specific positions or expectations. Let the feeling of the heavy blanket be received without the mental insistence that it must remain exactly so. Let the mind rest without clinging to the specific memory or plan that arises. The surrender of upadana is the softening of the boundaries of the self, allowing the personal tension to dissolve into the vast, impersonal peace of interconnectedness. The essential difference between craving, tanha, and clinging, upadana, is the level of intensity and commitment. Craving is the impulse to reach out, while clinging is the hand that has closed tightly around the object and refuses to let go. Clinging is the accumulated energy of past cravings solidified into an active stance of possession or refusal. If the preceding craving had been interrupted by awareness, the solidification into attachment would never have occurred, proving again that the entire process is a conditioned flow, not a predetermined fate. The Zen masters teach that the practice of non-attachment is not about throwing things away, but about not grasping them in the first place, or, if grasping has occurred, simply opening the hand. Kenshin often reflected on the river stone he held. If he grasped it tightly, his hand cramped, but if he held it lightly, acknowledging its independent existence, his hand remained relaxed and free. This realization applies equally to our identity, our opinions, and our temporary sensory states. When we release the need to possess them, the inner tension subsides immediately. If the clinging mind, so intent on possessing the temporary peace or avoiding the minor discomfort, is not released, this intense, self-referential energy of attachment instantly generates the active force that will manifest the next cycle of existence. This powerful, self-renewing energy of clinging leads directly to the 10th link in the chain, the force of becoming, the commitment to future manifestation. Becoming, bhava, and the energetic commitment. When the mind has solidified its impulse into active clinging, upadana, this intense adherence generates the 10th link in the chain, becoming, or the energetic commitment to future manifestation, bhava. Bhava is not the eventual result, but rather the powerful kinetic energy, the momentum, the profound investment of karmic potential that ensures the manifestation of a new cycle of existence, whether that cycle is the continuation of a physical life, the persistent recurrence of a difficult emotion, or the subtle commitment to maintain a particular identity from one moment to the next. It is the deep, innate drive within the consciousness that says, "I will be," or "I will become." Let us feel this energy of becoming in the body as we lie still, recognizing the profound effort involved even in the apparent rest. There is a subtle hum beneath the surface of the quiet, a faint, undeniable vibration of intention, the determination of the nervous system to maintain its functions, the silent resolve of the lungs to draw the next breath, and the implicit expectation in the mind that tomorrow will arrive. This active, continuous generation of existence, powered by the clinging to an I that must endure and experience, is the quiet, ceaseless roar of bhava, demonstrating that even in stillness, the universe compels a forward motion rooted in past ignorance. The Zen monk Kenshin observed this principle in the simple act of lighting his morning fire. He saw that the friction of the flint, the momentary heat of the spark, representing clinging, was not the fire itself, but the necessary condition that ignited the dry tinder, creating the visible, sustained heat and light that followed. That transition from the brief spark to the persistent flame is bhava, the sustained energy that commits to the manifestation of existence. Without the dry fuel of ignorance and the friction of craving, the energy of becoming would simply dissipate into the empty air, leaving no trace of heat or illumination. In the hours preceding deep sleep, bhava manifests as the mind's insistent need to plan, review, and organize the future, an energetic commitment to a constructed timeline that extends far beyond the quiet safety of this bed. This mental restlessness is the mind actively pouring its energy into the future, creating the ground for future births of tension, anxiety, and striving, driven by the profound attachment to the outcome of events. We practice non-doing by consciously withdrawing this energy from projection, allowing the momentum of future commitment to gently settle and dissolve back into the neutrality of the present stillness. The profound dependency of bhava on upadana is crucial for our understanding of liberation. If we successfully release the clinging, the insistence on holding the perfect state of comfort, or the rigid view of self, the powerful energy source for becoming is immediately cut off. There is nothing to propel the cycle forward. When Kenshin released his expectation of what his meditation should achieve, the striving energy that had previously made his muscles tense immediately subsided, demonstrating that peace is not achieved through effort, but through the deliberate, moment-to-moment cessation of the will to become something other than what we already are. We often mistake the manifestation of a peaceful state for the end of the journey, but even the clinging to peace itself can generate bhava, committing us to a cycle of seeking that specific, comfortable mental state. True liberation, the extinguishing of the cycle, occurs when we are simply present with the raw, unadorned experience, without projecting the energetic will to maintain the pleasure or suppress the discomfort. This non-committal presence starves the engine of becoming, allowing the consciousness to rest deeply in its unconditioned nature, free from the burden of continuous creation. Notice how the body responds when you intentionally release the energy of bhava. Perhaps the shoulders, which held the subtle expectation of staying still or moving later, suddenly drop an infinitesimal fraction. The face, perhaps unconsciously anticipating the morning light, softens its muscles. This softening is the physical manifestation of the energy of becoming, withdrawing its intense, forward-driving pressure, allowing a gentle, spacious relaxation to fill the gaps where the determination to be previously resided, paving the way for true, regenerative rest. The power of bhava is intrinsically linked to time, creating the persistent illusion that we are moving toward a stable future identity. It is the energetic glue that binds the present moment of experience to the future moment of expected result. However, when we anchor awareness entirely in the breath, which exists only in the duration of its inhalation and exhalation, we bypass the energetic leap into the future. By experiencing this moment purely and completely, we refuse to fuel the energetic momentum that insists that the next moment must be different or better than this one. Bhava ensures that the seed of past karma, sown by ignorance and watered by craving and clinging, will eventually germinate and burst forth as a new, recognizable form of existence. This process is continuous and relentless, constantly recreating the conditions for new states of being, demonstrating the inherent instability and constant flux of the conditioned world. If this powerful, forward-driving momentum is not interrupted, it leads with absolute certainty to the final and inevitable stage of manifestation, the event known simply as the arrival of a new form. This continuous, energetic commitment to existence, born of non-understanding, immediately culminates in the actual emergence of a new state. The intense pressurized energy of becoming can only sustain itself for so long before it must break through the conceptual barrier and manifest as a tangible form, setting the stage for the next and most concrete link in the cycle, the inevitable, inescapable moment of true manifestation. Nascimento, jati, the manifestation of form. The persistent, forward-driving energy of becoming, bhava, fueled by the accumulated adherence of clinging, upadana, finally collapses into the 11th link, birth or manifestation, jati. Jati represents the emergence of a new form of existence, the definitive arrival of a new mental or physical state, the moment the karmic blueprint dictated by the previous 10 links takes tangible shape. Crucially, this is not exclusively the physical process of being born into a human body, but the continuous, moment-to-moment birth of every state of being, the birth of an emotion, the birth of a thought, the birth of a renewed identity upon waking, or the birth of a particular physical sensation within the frame of the body. Consider the simple birth of an image in the mind as you relax deeply. For a moment, the mind is empty, but then, fueled by the energy of past attachments, an image, perhaps a recollection of a forest path or a face, suddenly is. That spontaneous emergence of the coherent, distinct mental form is jati. It is the undeniable manifestation of form, mental or material, that establishes a new locus of experience, and because this new form is born dependent on ignorance, it carries within it the seeds of its own eventual sorrow and dissolution, perpetuating the fundamental vulnerability of conditioned existence. The monk Kenshin learned to witness this birth in the natural world, observing how a single bead of dew would suddenly coalesce on the edge of a leaf during the coolness of the morning. That bead of water, entirely dependent on the atmospheric conditions, the temperature, and the specific surface tension of the leaf, represented jati. It was a perfect, singular manifestation of form, yet Kenshin knew that as soon as the sun rose and the conditions changed, this perfectly born form would immediately begin its journey toward dissolution, beautifully illustrating the inherent impermanence that accompanies every birth. In our striving for rest, we might experience the birth of frustration. One moment, the mind is relatively calm, and the next, a defined, structured state of irritation emerges, perhaps driven by the subtle sound of a clock ticking or the memory of an unresolved issue. That sudden, clear manifestation of the emotion, complete with its physical sensations and mental narratives, is jati. It is a complete, momentary manifestation of a painful existence, and because we cling to the idea that I am this frustration, we are drawn immediately into the cycle of reacting to the birth, thus solidifying its hold upon our awareness. we can contemplate the deeper philosophical meaning that every breath is a momentary birth of the body. With the inhalation, the chest rises, the diaphragm descends, and the form of the body is renewed and sustained for that fleeting instant. This continuous birth maintains the physical vehicle, but it also carries the subtle understanding that this new, momentarily renewed form is destined to dissolve. To truly see jhati is to recognize that stability is an illusion, and that every fresh moment is a miraculous, fleeting emergence that vanishes the instant it is completed. When we awaken in the morning, the complex mental structure we call our personal identity, the collection of memories, beliefs, and expectations that define who I am, is instantly born. This is jhati on a grander scale, the manifestation of a new, highly complex form of the self, entirely dependent on the energy, bhava, invested the night before, and the underlying ignorance, avidya, that maintains the illusion of separateness. The practice of mindfulness allows us to witness this birth, recognizing the I that arises as merely a conditioned flow of phenomena, not a fixed, independent entity. The pain inherent in jhati is not simply the suffering of physical birth, but the pain of commitment to future sorrow. Once a form or state is manifested, whether it is a physical body or a strong emotion, it immediately becomes subject to the laws of entropy and change. It is vulnerable to separation, loss, and decay. The moment of birth is therefore the moment the clock of dissolution begins ticking, creating the foundation for future grief and dissatisfaction, setting the stage for the final links of the causal chain. As you allow your body to settle now, recognize the birth of sensory experience, the sudden appearance of the sound of the night air moving past a window, the gentle momentary emergence of warmth in your feet. Witness these as transient, impersonal events, not as permanent features of the environment that must be maintained or controlled. By observing these fleeting births without attachment, we loosen the grip of the self upon the cycle, allowing the emergent forms to simply appear and quickly pass away. The essential realization of jhati is that everything that appears must necessarily disappear. The magnificent manifestation of form, which seemed so solid and real, is inherently temporary. This understanding is the key to dissolving the fear of loss, because when we see that every birth is immediately connected to dissolution, we cease to crave the persistence of the manifest form, settling instead into the flow of continuous change that is the true nature of reality. The profound truth revealed by the 11th link is that the presence of manifestation guarantees its eventual absence. Because the body and mind continue to be born moment by moment, the culmination of this relentless becoming must lead us inexorably toward the final stages of the 12-fold chain, a place where all manifested forms, whether physical or mental, must finally yield to the inevitable process of transformation and cessation. Aging and death, jara marana, the inevitable conclusion. The ultimate, unavoidable consequence of birth, jhati, is the 12th and final link in the chain of dependent origination, aging and death, jara marana. This is the cessation, the dissolution, the inevitable process of decay and loss that applies to every single conditioned phenomenon. Whether we speak of the slow, grinding erosion of the physical body over decades, the sudden death of a cherished thought, or the grief and sorrow that accompanies the ending of any state we cling to. It is the undeniable truth that anything which has come into being, manifesting from the energy of becoming, must necessarily return to the unconditioned space of non-manifestation, completing the cycle that began with the fundamental misunderstanding of ignorance. We observe this process not just in the eventual collapse of the body, but in the micro moments of our current experience as we lie here in the darkness. Feel the subtle but continuous shifting within the body, the dull ache in the hip that was not there 5 minutes ago, the fleeting warmth in the hands that quickly cools, the clarity of a thought that instantly dissolves into mental haze. These minor fluctuations, these tiny births and deaths occurring every second, are the ceaseless performance of Jara Marana in miniature, reminding us that permanence is merely a convenient but ultimately untrue concept that we impose upon the dynamic, flowing reality of existence, generating subtle anxiety when things refuse to stay put. The monk Kenshin, sitting in his garden, found profound peace in observing the slow transformation of the massive stone lantern, realizing that even granite, which seems to embody eternal stability, was subject to Jara Marana. The lichens that clung to its surface, the hairline cracks tracing their way across its polished face, the faint smoothing of its edges caused by centuries of rain and wind, all were silent testaments to the continuous, relentless dissolution of form. He understood that the sorrow we feel is not caused by the change itself, but by our deep-seated wish for things, especially ourselves and those we love, to remain exactly as they are in this fleeting, beautiful moment. As we surrender into the deepening relaxation, we are practicing acceptance of this unavoidable dissolution. When the eyelids grow heavy and the awareness starts to dim, we are experiencing a temporary gentle death of the active, striving consciousness, preparing for the deeper cessation that sleep brings. This letting go of conscious control, this allowing of the mind to blur and soften, is an act of profound liberation from the resistance against Jara Marana. We choose peace over resistance, allowing the inevitable winding down to proceed naturally without the tension of demanding stability or eternal wakefulness. The suffering inherent in Jara Marana extends beyond physical pain to encompass the deep psychological distress of lamentation, sorrow, and despair that accompanies loss. This emotional pain arises directly from the preceding links, our clinging, upadana, to the manifested form, jati, creates the condition for deep anguish when that form inevitably begins to fade or disappear. If we could truly see the manifested state as merely a transient, interdependently arising phenomenon, the dissolving of that form would be met not with despair, but with a quiet acknowledgement of the natural, cyclical flow of existence. Imagine a soft, persistent wind passing through the trees just outside your window, a sound that rises and then fades completely into silence, only to be reborn again. This auditory experience encapsulates the entire journey of the 12 links, the quiet preceding the sound, ignorance, the impulse for the sound to occur, becoming, the distinct wave of sound, birth, and finally, the slow dissipation into nothingness, aging and death. By witnessing this complete cycle in the simple movement of the wind, we detach from the outcome, observing the pattern of rising and falling without judging the existence of the sound itself. The realization of Jara Marana paradoxically inspires the deepest form of peace. When we fully accept the impermanence of all things, our comfort, our success, our relationships, and our very breath, we stop investing massive amounts of energetic effort into trying to fix, freeze, or control an unstable world. This deep surrender allows the nervous system to relax its perpetual guard, realizing the inherent futility of demanding eternal stability from a universe built upon dynamic change. This acceptance is the beginning of genuine, unconditioned freedom. The profound teaching of the final link is that because we have experienced birth and manifestation, the process of transformation and cessation is absolutely guaranteed. One cannot exist without the other. This inevitable conclusion to the cycle of manifestation, while sounding mournful, is in fact a compassionate reminder of the urgency of waking up now, in this moment, before the opportunity to observe and understand the true nature of reality passes into dissolution. As we relax further, allow the awareness of impermanence to wash over you, softening the edges of the present moment. Let go of the need for the mind to remain clear, the body to remain perfectly comfortable, or the environment to remain absolutely silent. Everything is changing, dissolving, and shifting, and this profound, gentle instability is the ultimate invitation to drop all striving and simply rest in the truth of what is, moment by dissolving moment. The cycle, however, does not end here. The suffering and ignorance generated by this final link, the reaction to loss and the clinging to permanence, feed back immediately into the first link, demonstrating that dependent origination is not a straight line toward a final end, but a continuous, relentless, self-perpetuating loop of existence that must be fundamentally understood to be transcended. An unbroken cycle. With the contemplation of aging and death, we have completed the journey around the 12-fold wheel of dependent origination. Yet this completion is not an ending, but the demonstration of an unbroken, continuous, self-sustaining loop. The awareness that the pain and sorrow, jara marana, experienced upon the dissolution of a manifested form immediately creates a fresh seed of ignorance, avijja, the very first link, because we often react to loss with a renewed, vigorous clinging to the idea of a self that has been harmed, or a stability that has been lost, thereby restarting the entire process instantaneously and powerfully. This profound concept reveals that the 12 links are not sequential steps in a predetermined linear chain, but 12 interwoven conditions arising simultaneously and continuously, reinforcing one another in a rapid, inescapable feedback loop that defines our conditioned existence. Think of it less as a chain and more as a densely woven net, where pulling on any single thread immediately tugs upon all the others, emphasizing the deep, intricate interdependency of every aspect of our experience, from our most subtle feelings to our most profound physical manifestations. The understanding of the complete cycle reveals that liberation does not depend on somehow stopping the final link. We cannot prevent death or decay, but on severing the initial link, the deep, pervasive ignorance, by illuminating the interconnected reality of phenomena. We dissolve the foundational misunderstanding that there is an independent, permanent I that is traveling through this cycle, an I that can suffer, cling, or die. When the light of wisdom shines upon the ignorance, the entire mechanism of suffering simply loses its motivating force. Let us briefly trace the profound arc once more, allowing the rhythm of the causal flow to settle the mind into a state of deep, contemplative peace. Driven by ignorance, we generate formations and intentions. These power the consciousness, which gives rise to name and form. The sensory doors open, contact is made, and feeling arises. If we react to feeling with craving and clinging, we fuel the energy of becoming, which manifests as birth and inevitably culminates in the inescapable truth of decay and loss, only to feed back into a new cycle of not knowing. This understanding provides the ultimate comfort, especially in the pursuit of sleep. When the mind refuses to settle, restless with the day's concerns, we recognize that this restlessness is itself a manifestation, jati, born of the energy, bhava, of clinging, upadana, to some desired outcome, fueled by the feeling, vedana, of dissatisfaction, all rooted in the ignorance, avijja, that believes this agitation belongs to a separate, solid self. By simply observing the entire flow without judgment, we withdraw the fuel of adherence, and the cycle of agitation gently unwinds and ceases. The Zen tradition uses the powerful metaphor of the fire. Ignorance is the lack of light, the darkness that obscures the true nature of things. Craving is the intense heat and flame, the burning desire to grasp. The rest of the links are the smoke, the heat and the ashes, the inevitable products of the fire's burning. The teaching is not to extinguish the fire by force, but to simply remove the fuel, the ignorance and the craving, allowing the fire to naturally subside and cease burning for lack of substance, restoring the innate coolness of peace. Resting now, realize that your body and mind are not solid, independent entities, but temporary clusters of conditions, dependent on the vast universe that surrounds them, the gravitational pull of the earth, the stillness of the air, the distant sound of water, the safety of your resting place. Every sensation, thought, and breath is interbeing with everything else, demonstrating the profound interconnectedness that dissolves the fear of isolation and the burden of singularity, allowing the heavy weight of the separate self to finally lift. This complete vision of the 12 links, seen not as punishment but as a precise map of suffering, guides us directly to the path of freedom. It instructs us that peace is not achieved by gaining something, but by releasing the conditioned tendency to grasp and adhere to phenomena that are already dissolving. Freedom is simply the unobstructed flow of interdependence, the recognition that nothing stands alone, and therefore nothing is lost when everything changes. Allow this profound philosophical understanding of universal interdependence to serve as the ultimate lullaby. You are not a separate island struggling against the currents of time, but an inseparable expression of the entire cosmic flow. There is nothing to hold on to, nothing to achieve, and nowhere else to be, for you are already perfectly embedded in the infinite, resting safely within the very nature of reality, ready to sink into the deepest, most restorative sleep. The wisdom of the unbroken cycle informs us that true rest is achieved when the mind ceases its energetic investment in future becoming, allowing the cycle of striving to dissolve into the present moment. Now, we prepare to consolidate this profound peace by gently re-anchoring the body and mind, celebrating the spaciousness of non-separation, before drifting into the ultimate silence. The realization of emptiness, shunyata, the peace of non-separation. The profound insight derived from contemplating the continuous flow of dependent origination is the realization of shunyata, or emptiness, not emptiness as nothingness or void, but the inherent lack of independent, self-existing essence in any phenomenon we perceive. Because everything, from the smallest dust particle to the largest mountain, from the fleeting thought of worry to the monk Kenshin himself, arises only in dependence upon countless causes and conditions. Nothing possesses a fixed, permanent identity that stands alone, separate from the rest of the cosmos. This realization is the ultimate antidote to the ignorance that initiates the cycle of suffering. For once, we see that nothing has a separate self. The possibility of clinging to a self or its possessions completely dissolves into spaciousness and peace, offering the deepest spiritual comfort imaginable. Imagine the gentle scent of pine needles carried on a cool evening breeze, and try to isolate the essence of that scent. Can you find it independently of the air currents, the temperature, the decay of the organic matter, and the sensitive apparatus of your own nose? The scent is completely empty of inherent existence. It is merely a momentary, dependent arrangement of conditions. Similarly, your body resting here now, feeling heavy and relaxed, is empty of a permanent self, constituted entirely by the interdependence of bone, muscle, air, water, ancestral energy, and the quiet support of the floor beneath you, thereby offering a gentle, profound permission to let go of the burden of maintaining a separate entity in the darkness. This wisdom fundamentally changes our relationship with the world, moving us from fear and grasping to trust and profound acceptance. If phenomena are merely fluid gatherings of conditions, they cannot truly be attained or lost, only transformed. When the monk Kenshin observed the final quiet dissolution of the autumn leaf into the damp earth, he no longer saw death, but a change in form, an immediate return of nutrients and energy back into the dependent flow that sustains the rest of the garden. The leaf was not gone. It had simply ceased to manifest as a distinct red shape, allowing its component elements to become the non-leaf, the soil, the root, the next season's bud, a process completely free from loss. Allow the weighty realization of emptiness to seep into the deepest layers of your resting mind, releasing any lingering resistance you might hold onto regarding your identity or your situation. If your worries about tomorrow are empty of fixed substance, arising only from the conditions of past conditioning and future projection, you can observe them as clouds passing through the vast sky of your awareness, recognizing their profound lack of independent reality. This recognition is profoundly relaxing. We are released from the exhausting spiritual effort of trying to make the ephemeral permanent, finally understanding that true solidity resides only in the recognition of universal interconnectedness. The great Zen masters teach that the mountain is the mountain, but it is simultaneously empty of being only the mountain, since it is utterly dependent on geological history, rain erosion, and the subjective perception of the observer. As you lie here, feel the sensation of your breathing, recognizing that the very act of drawing air is empty of being only your act, entirely dependent on the trees in distant forests and the vast planetary atmosphere. This insight that you are literally breathing the universe and the universe is breathing you dissolves the imaginary boundaries of the skin, expanding your sense of self until it encompasses the tranquil, unbounded space of the resting night. This perspective is not cold philosophy, but the source of warm, compassionate relaxation. When we see the interdependence of all beings, we realize that the suffering of one is deeply interwoven with the well-being of all others, including our own. This deep, felt connection eliminates the need for competitive striving or isolated achievement, replacing it with the gentle certainty that we are held, supported, and sustained by the entire fabric of existence, allowing the tension around striving to melt away completely. Resting in the knowledge of shunyata means resting without attachment to the outcome of your sleep. You are allowing the mind to be empty of expectation, empty of definition, empty of the noisy insistence of the ego. This profound mental silence creates the perfect conditions for the body's own restorative processes to take over without interference, sinking you down into the deepest, most rejuvenating realms of unconscious awareness, where even the thought of "I am sleeping" finally ceases to exist, making way for genuine, unburdened repose. The quiet understanding of interbeing is the final lesson the monk Kenshin taught in the garden. He pointed not just to the falling leaf, but to the entire space around it, encompassing the stillness of the air, the slow movement of the clouds, and the distant, almost imperceptible sound of the stream. He conveyed that true peace is found only in this holistic, non-dualistic vision, where the observer, the observed object, and the act of observation are entirely one seamless, flowing reality, leaving no separate ground for anxiety or resistance to stand upon. Let the light of this wisdom illuminate any remaining pockets of tension, transforming the rigidity of separation into the fluid reality of interconnection. Notice how the realization that your existence is completely dependent on everything external, the warmth of your covers, the quiet of the night, the stability of the floor, paradoxically makes you feel utterly whole and safe, releasing the need to be self-sufficient or tirelessly alert against imagined threats lurking outside the boundaries of the self. As we conclude this contemplation, embrace the spaciousness of shunyata. You are not contained, you are unbounded. You are not fixed, you are flowing. You are not alone, you are the expression of everything. Allow this ultimate, profound truth to cradle your consciousness gently, dissolving the final barriers between the waking mind and the deep, restorative currents of effortless sleep. Interdependent rest. Now, let us gently and intentionally allow the philosophical insights of interdependence and emptiness to dissolve into pure sensation, consolidating the deepest state of rest achievable. Bring your awareness back to the quiet, subtle miracle of your physical body lying here, appreciating the perfect stillness that has been cultivated through this journey. Feel the weight of your head sinking heavily into your pillow, recognizing that the weight you feel is a gentle, gravitational embrace from the earth, a steady reassurance that you are perfectly anchored and supported right where you are, requiring no effort to hold yourself up. Softly, turn your attention to the rhythm of your breath, not seeking to change it or control it, but simply witnessing it as a natural, autonomic function that continues effortlessly on your behalf, independent of your active will. Recognize that this breath is the tangible link to the vast living web of the planet. You are exchanging life with the trees, sharing molecules with the distant stars, and participating directly in the cosmic process of renewal with every slow inhalation and even slower, more complete exhalation. This rhythmic flow is the embodiment of the dependent origination we explored, now experienced as pure, restful simplicity. Feel the profound sense of release in your shoulders, which may have been carrying the unseen weight of the day's responsibilities, anxieties, and expectations. With each passing moment, imagine those weights dissolving completely, allowing the tension to drain out through your arms, through your fingertips, and sinking deep into the mattress beneath you. Allow the realization that you are not solely responsible for the entire universe to flood your system, recognizing that the vast, interconnected flow will continue without your conscious, vigilant effort, granting you full permission to completely surrender to the night. If thoughts or residual worries arise now, a fleeting image from the day, a concern for tomorrow, observe them with the compassionate understanding of interdependence. These thoughts are not solid facts, nor are they commands requiring immediate action. They are merely the last flickering lights of the mind's accustomed habit of clinging, the final traces of tanha and upadana gently fading away. Do not engage them. Instead, mentally place them on a soft, dark cloud and watch the cloud drift lazily out of your field of awareness, allowing the spaciousness of the dark to claim your inner landscape. This haven we have created together is supported by the shared intention for peace and wisdom. If this journey has brought a measure of tranquility or understanding to your life, we humbly invite you to subscribe to this channel and comment below, perhaps noting the country or time of night where you are finally resting, helping us to maintain this small, quiet harbor of contemplative teaching and soothing narratives for others seeking refuge from the noise of the world. Your support ensures the flow of this peaceful interdependency continues, nurturing the stillness needed by many. Now, as the boundaries between conscious thought and unconscious rest become increasingly blurred, allow your entire being to melt into the softness surrounding you. Know that you are whole, you are interconnected, and you are utterly safe in this moment of surrender. Let the wisdom of the monk Kenshin and the flowing reality of the 12 links dissolve completely into the deep silence of your own inner being. There is nothing more to do, nowhere more to go, and nothing to hold on to. Simply sink, deeper and deeper, into the nourishing darkness of the night, letting the flow of interdependence carry you far away toward the deepest, most restorative rest. Sleep now, knowing you are part of the vast, unending peace.